Hi, everybody. Hi there. Welcome. Thank you for being here today. My name is Natalie, and I am here to present some information for you about Sharon Tate, who was an actress and model in the 1960s who was murdered by the Manson family. And for those of you that are familiar with this story, we are definitely going to go into it tonight as I work through her chart. But before I do that, let me make sure I'm up and running and online. Who was murdered by the... We got it. Okay, perfect. So I want to make sure I've got the chat and I'm up and running, and we are going to go ahead and get into it. Thank you all for being here today. And I think first and foremost, I'm going to start off by sharing a little bit about Sharon Tate and who she was and why she was important, like an important cultural figure at the time, and how her entire, the memory of her, because she died many years ago, in 1969, and how the memory of her is more associated these days with how she died rather than, how she lived, because she died in such a brutal way and very senseless act of violence. And but we want to honor her memory too in this video. I don't have any personal connection to her, but just in reading her story and doing her chart, I was really feeling the energy of her chart and what a beautiful person she was. And I'm sure all her relatives would want her remembered as the very beautiful person that she was as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at, and she was one of those people that was beautiful on the inside and the outside. And a lot of people were completely shocked by her death. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Okay. Here we go. All right. So this is the beautiful Sharon Tate. Okay. This was her in 1968. She was born in 1943 in Dallas, Texas, and she died at age 26 in Los Angeles, California. Sharon Tate, you can see her married name was Polanski. She was married to the famous director Roman Polanski for about a year before she died. And she was 8.5 months pregnant with his child and her first child when she was brutally murdered. So it's a very, very sad story of what happened to her, but I will just read a little bit about her life. And you can see here, very stunning woman. She was an American actress and model. During the 1960s, she appeared in advertisements and small television roles. She played in the film Eye of the Devil in 1966. She played in Valley of the Dolls. And she also played in a movie called The Fearless Vampire Killers, directed by her husband, Roman Polanski, who she married the following year. And on August 9th, 1969, Tate and 4 others, that would be 3 of her friends and another stranger who just happened to be at her house at the time, were murdered by members of the Manson family, a cult and the Manson family was a cult that was headed up by Charles Manson. And most people are familiar with Charles Manson, but she was murdered with 4 other people by members of the Manson family, a cult, in the home she shared with Roman Polanski. She was 8.5 months pregnant when she was killed. So very, very tough situation there. And for those of you that are aware of Charles Manson, I'm just going to show you a little bit here because it wasn't actually Charles Manson that killed her. It was one of his followers that killed her. Several of the followers of his that broke into her home, and they weren't particularly targeting her. They were actually trying to start a race war and engage in helter skelter and all this stuff. And for those of you that know anything about Charles Manson or the Manson family, I'm not an expert on them by any means, but they do interact with Sharon Tate as a result of what they did to her. So they broke into her home, not knowing who was going to be there, with the intention of making it look like a ritualistic killing in order to start a race war. So it was a pretty brutal thing that ended up happening. But just a little bit here about the Manson family. The Manson family, known among its members as the Family, was a commune, gang, and cult led by criminal Charles Manson, who was active in California in the late 1960s and early 1970s. The group consisted approximately of 100 followers who lived an unconventional lifestyle, using a bunch of different hallucinogens and living, free and all of that. And he attracted people by the hippie culture who were really into communal living. And this just talks a little bit about, in 1969, family members Susan Atkins, Tex Watson, and Patricia Krenwinkel entered the home of Hollywood actress Sharon Tate and murdered her and 4 others. Linda Casaban was also present but did not take part. Members of the Manson family also committed a number of other murders, assaults, petty crimes, theft, and street vandalism. But the murder of Sharon Tate was especially gruesome because she was pregnant and she was, begging for the life of her unborn child. It's just a very, of course, not trying to be dark, guys, but but anyway, it's no laughing matter, of course. But I just wanted to let you guys know kind of the territory that we're going into. Now, we're not going to spend the whole time talking about her death. We're going to spend the most of her time talking about her life. At the end, we will do a chart that shows the transits on the night that she died. And we will also compare her chart to the chart of the Charles Manson cult member who killed her. So we will do that at the very end. But as we're going through, I want to talk about her life and who she was and what her chart says about her life. Okay. So a couple other quick pictures to show you guys. So she was married to famous director Roman Polanski, who's a very interesting character. His chart is fascinating too, but look at how much smaller he is. He's very, very short. Sharon was taller than him. And this is kind of like a Beauty and the Beast type of a energy right here between these two. But she was attracted to him. She was a young actress. More of an inexperienced young actress. And he was, 9 years older than her and a very well-known director and had directed some really, interesting films. And she was attracted to that about him. Although, looking at him and her, you'd probably look at that combination and say, well, why is she with him? And rumor is that when they had their first kiss, he had to literally jump up to kiss her because she was taller than him. So it's kind of an interesting story. Roman Polanski, he is still living now. He's almost 90 years old. And he has some stuff about his life that is pretty dark. He said he never recovered from the death of his wife, Sharon Tate. To this day, he says he's never recovered from it, even though he is remarried. And here's a picture of him and Sharon on their wedding. And look at her. She's stunning, cute. And look at him. He's kind of, anyway, he's a Polish guy who lived in France. And of course, she's an American. So that's interesting too. Here's him now. Here's her husband now, Roman Polanski, her would-be husband. And he is 90-ish, I think. And, he's directed some major films that have won tons of awards. But in 1977, about 8 years after Sharon's death, he was arrested for drugging and assaulting a 13-year-old girl. And he pled guilty to the assault of, relations with a minor in exchange for a probation-only sentence. And then the night before his sentencing, he fled the U.S. to Europe, and he remains a fugitive in the U.S., and he's lived in Europe. Further allegations of abuse have been made by other women. Now, she was this very kind of, sweet, wholesome Hollywood actress who was very innocent in a lot of ways. And, he was older and more experienced, but he was well known for his philandering and womanizing, etc. She and her little boy didn't deserve what happened to them. Yeah, Christy, I know. And she did have, her child was not quite born yet, but probably would have been born any week. And when she begged for her life, she just said, keep me alive and hold me hostage and let me have my baby and then do with me what you will. It's just so sad. When I was reading about her story, I definitely was, I cried a couple times. Like, it's just sad what happened. It's really, really heartbreaking what happened to her and her child. And you can see that she's just like this amazing bright light. And she had this attraction to powerful, dominating men. Now you look at Roman Polanski and you go, like, he doesn't look like he could be that much. He's a little guy, whatever, but I feel like he kind of has a Napoleon complex. I looked at his chart briefly. He has Mars rising, so he's very direct. And as I mentioned, he's been in trouble now later in life for assaulting women. So, we'll talk about their relationship a little bit more. But you can see just from her expression, like how hopeful and happy she looks. And, anyway, I don't know if she would be alive to see what the accusations against him and what he did to women. I don't know, right? Very painful. Her choice in men, very, very painful for her. And I said, here's his biography, Roman Polanski. And here is Sharon right before this was, you can see she's pregnant there. There's her little belly. She's holding up some baby clothes. She was so excited to be a mom. Like, all she wanted to do is be a mom. She was having a little boy, and Roman Polanski was away. Now you might be saying, well, how did he survive when those killers went to her house and 4 of her friends were there, but her own husband wasn't there? So he was in London finishing a movie. And he was supposed to have been there, but he was in London finishing that movie. And so he had asked a couple friends to go stay with her before he got back to Los Angeles. And that's when a little bit after midnight on the night of August 9th of 1969, Sharon and everyone else in that house was brutally murdered by the Manson family. So that is what we have so far regarding Sharon. And I want to just go ahead and take a look at her chart. Before I go to her chart, look at Sharon's face and look at her wide set eyes. Look at those big, like, she has those beautiful, deep set, deep emotional eyes, like perfect face, very, very soft and gentle type of a face that she has. She kind of has that gummy smile too. You see how she kind of has that gummy smile. Gummy smile, incidentally, is associated with Jupiter or Sagittarius, but she has those deep, wide set, beautifully deep emotional eyes. And, very gentle, kind of soft appearance. So keep that in mind when we go to look at her chart. So let's take a quick look at the chart. I'm going to switch over. And here we have her chart. So Sharon is an Aquarius. She was born January 24th. And you can see there's her sun in Aquarius with Mercury retrograde in Aquarius in her 7th house of partnerships. Okay. And here she is, Cancer rising. And I think she totally looks like a Cancer rising. I really, really do. When you look at her, those very like soft features and those big, deep set round eyes, very Cancerian appearance that she has there, soft and gentle. Jupiter rising, well loved by everyone, very popular, very humble person, exemplifying the best qualities of Cancer. We see Jupiter on her ascendant, exalted in Cancer, retrograde on her ascendant. And we also see Pluto in her 1st house there, Pluto and Leo in her 1st house. And then we also see her moon. All right. We see her moon in Virgo there in the 3rd house. So the moon is the ruler of her ascendant. So this moon in Virgo is going to be very important, along with this Jupiter rising, Pluto in the first house. And I'm calling this video Doomed Beauty. And when it comes to doomed beauty, there's a couple of things that I'm referencing. One thing I'm referencing is this Venus South Node conjunction in the 8th house, okay? And of course, the 8th house associated with death and transformation. And we are going to talk a little bit about death on this webcast. Now, as we look at astrology charts, when we look at the 8th house, it doesn't just have to do with us, it does have to do with our death, but we're not here to predict people's deaths. And I just want to tell you that if I talk about certain chart configurations in her chart or talk about the 8th house in that way, please don't take that and go to your own chart and try to figure out how you're going to die or start freaking out or anything like that. Please don't do that, okay? I'm just talking about things here. And because she has already died, there's definitely some things that we can say about her chart. And the 8th house is traditionally a very difficult house. And there's great lessons to be learned in the 8th house. Just because it's difficult doesn't mean, that you're going to be wiped out, by the Manson family. It doesn't mean that. And if you have Pluto rising, it doesn't mean you're going to be a victim of a murder. Now, I mentioned that myself because I myself have Pluto rising and no one's offed me yet. And I also have planets in the 8th house and no one's offed me yet. So I just want everyone who does have planets in the 8th house and does have Pluto rising or things like that, don't go overboard with things. Because the planets literally have multiple significations. And when we're looking at a chart, the planets represent multiple topics and multiple things that can happen in life. So I'm going to go ahead and begin, and we are going to start. Certainly the 8th house is a difficult place to have the planet that represents relationships, Venus, love, beauty, relationships. Certainly it being in the 8th house with the South Node is a challenging position for her relationships. Now, as we know, she married Roman Polanski, who was very, whose rumors about his infidelity and his cheating and his philandering and his, and later coming out about the abuse of certain women. So that's a tough one, Venus, K2, South Node in the 8th house, that's a tough one. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm referring to it as doomed beauty, also because of the Pluto rising. And, she is a very, very beautiful woman, has way more beauty than most any of us could ever imagine, But the problem with Sharon is that she had low confidence and she really didn't feel like she was beautiful and she didn't really connect to her beauty. And actually her opportunities were limited when it came to acting in roles because directors would just write her off as a girl with a nice body who had a nice face, who looked good, but couldn't really act. And so her beauty actually was kind of a negative factor for her. And she definitely, a lot of people, I think you have to kind of imagine yourself in the 1960s. Okay. So in the 1960s, a lot of things were happening, and I'm going to quickly talk about that too as well. So in the 1960s, mini skirts became a thing, like free love. Everyone was, Woodstock, like psychedelics. The Beatles were becoming a big thing. Everybody was like enjoying the life, and people were breaking out of their shells and rebelling and living differently and enjoying the really good times that happened in the 1960s. And, Sharon was a part of that too. She was a part of that whole like free love kind of hippie vibe. And Roman Polanski was definitely a part of that too. Her husband, he was famous for saying, "I want a hippie, not a housewife." and things like that. And he believed in like free love, and he didn't really believe in monogamy. But Sharon did believe in monogamy, and she just kind of looked the other way with what he was doing. But she also at the same time was wearing like mini skirts and bikinis, and she even posed in Playboy at one time. So she was doing things that women didn't normally do either, or she was doing some very, different things is what I would say as well too. She was pursuing a career as a starlet, as a actress. She was very comfortable with nudity as long as it was like natural. She was fine with nudity. She had a very modern attitude towards a lot of things, but she didn't have a modern attitude towards infidelity, really. She just kind of looked the other way when it came to the infidelity. So we see that big influence with her relationships in the South Node there. We also see her sun in the seventh house. Of course, when we see the sun in the seventh house in any chart, we have to wonder, how big of an influence is our partner having on us? And, how much are we getting to know and understand ourselves through our partner? Now, that's not a bad thing to get to know and understand yourself through relationships and through a partner. But when you're timid or shy, or you don't know yourself too well yet, or you're kind of younger and you have an older partner, that can be intimidating. And we can see that sun in Aquarius in the seventh house in an opposition to Pluto. And a lot of people that have written books about Sharon and Roman's relationship said that she was intimidated by him because he was very like smart and worldly. He was a perfectionist. He had more experience than her, so he could be very intimidating at times towards her. And we'll talk about the balance of power in their relationship. And of course, when we're talking about, the first house of self and the seventh house of partnerships, and we have a Sun-Pluto opposition between those two houses, there definitely can be, issues in the partnership with power and power imbalances. So we will talk about that too. Now, let me just go ahead. So I kind of touched on a few things randomly, but I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about, first of all, about her Cancer rising. Now, because she has Jupiter on the ascendant, and Jupiter is associated with goodness, and she really exemplified the most like beautiful things about Cancer rising, like wanting to be a mother, like nurturing, kind, gentle, sweet, caring, loving, all those things, all the very like deep and sensitive towards other people's feelings and not wanting to hurt people. Like she exemplified all the really positive qualities of Cancer because she has that Jupiter rising on her ascendant. Now, you might think with Jupiter rising that she would be like very gregarious or perhaps, be loud or something like that. But keep in mind that Jupiter is retrograde, and also the ruler of her ascendant, that moon in Virgo, is square Saturn. So the ruler of her ascendant is in a square to Saturn in Gemini. And one thing you guys should know about Sharon Tate is that she was born into a military family. And she was a military brat who like lived all over, and they never stayed in one place for a long time. Now, Sharon's father was like supposedly like very stoic and quiet and serious. And he definitely had that military dad, strict kind of energy. And so some of that like quietness or shyness that Sharon had may have been part of the way that her father was, or the way that she saw her father be, or his rules, or the way that, prim and proper and manners and things like that. And so she wasn't one of those people that walked into a room and it was like, everyone pay attention to me. I need to be the center of attention. She definitely was not like that at all. She was much more shy and quiet and timid. And so I just want to read a quote that somebody said about her. They said that, let's go ahead. I want to show you guys her eyes here. They said she had a faultless face and enormous absorbent eyes, like eyes that were kind of like absorbing you, which is very Cancerian. And people described her as soft, gentle, sensitive, tender-hearted. She wanted to be a mother. She said that when she, let me go back to her chart. She said that when she got married and had kids, she was going to devote herself to her family and her children. Very moon, very Cancerian, very Jupiter on the ascendant. Very like, she also said that in the future, instead of just playing roles of like bimbos or women who looked good but didn't like say much, that she wanted to play roles that were also deep and sensitive and were more, and not just her being treated as a sex symbol. And so you can see that very like deep and sensitive aspect of the Cancerian rising coming through there, and her facial features and everything, and how she really looks like that kind of Cancer rising. Now, the thing about Cancer in general is, Cancer can be moody sometimes. It's a cardinal sign. It's changing all the time. And Cancer can also deal with self-esteem issues or being shy at times. Cancer has the hard shell until it kind of opens up and lets you in, type of thing, more sensitive energy. But yeah, so I think it's very, she does have that Cancerian energy. And one thing I had also read is that when Sharon, this was so hard when I read this, I was like, oh my God, poor thing. When those killers were in her house and they were, hurting her, she was calling out for her mother. And I thought, oh my God, I like cried when I read that. I was like, oh my God, which I know a lot of people, when they're in very scary situations like that, they will call out for their mother. But I just thought it was, with her Cancer rising and being pregnant, like it just was, I can't imagine those moments. And thank God her soul is at rest, But anyway, so I just wanted, there was almost with Sharon too, there was almost like a naive, trusting quality about her, which I think is very much the Jupiter rising of like the goodness and the generosity. And her and Roman Polanski would have like people over to their house all the time, like whoever could come over, people they didn't even know could come over. And a lot of people said that they were like almost too trusting with the people that they would let in their house. But it was like a time of free love. And it was a time of, everybody kind of joining together. And you can see that Sharon also has a grand air trine in her chart. Look at the big triangle right there. So she's got Sun and Mercury in Aquarius very closely trining Uranus and Saturn, and all trining Neptune. So she has what's called a grand air trine. So we're going to talk more about that grand air trine that she has. But, wanting a partner who's like very social and can introduce her to a lot of people, help her overcome that shyness, help her give her confidence, all those types of things that come with a grand air trine, wanting to be around friends, wanting to be social, wanting to get to know people, very much like bringing people together, that grand air trine energy. And I also just want to talk about that, there's this theory in astrology where the next sign makes up for the energy in the prior sign. So if Aries is like a go, 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 go type of sign, can be very impatient and impulsive, then Taurus comes after that and is more chill and, goes slower and takes things more easy. And, so every single sign, like if you go in order, they kind of self-correct. And I mentioned that, not that any sign is wrong, but I just mentioned that because with her being a Cancer rising, it's not like when she would go to auditions, she's like, look at me, I'm the, like you would assume like a Leo would. For example, Leo is the sign after Cancer. So, you know how Leos are very commanding and they're very like leadership, and they have that star power and that quality about them that makes them, noticed like very easily, where Cancer is a little more maybe shy, quiet, timid, bashful. Until you get to know them, they may be a little bit less. And so you can see, like, when she walks into a room to do like an audition, she's not like, I'm here, like, here I am. Like, she's like, hi, hello, I'm here, and I think their, directors and people that worked with her said that they had a little bit of a hard time because it was hard for her to show like star power, or hard for her to show charisma. Now, you would think with Pluto rising, that would give someone a lot of charisma. And in a lot of cases, it will. And it will sometimes turn people into a sex symbol and things like that. For those of you that recall Justin Bieber's chart, he has Pluto rising, and he's been an international sex symbol. Now, Sharon Tate really was too. Like, she was a quote unquote sex symbol, but she didn't really identify with that. That's not really what she wanted. She wasn't really like walking in with tons of charisma, like, look at me, notice me, that type of little more kind of in the background. And also that moon in Virgo, the ruler of her ascendant is that moon in Virgo. So she's not really like, she doesn't have like the moon in Leo or anything. She's not have the moon in Aries. So she's a little bit more shy, a little bit more reserved. And her moon, as I mentioned, is squaring Saturn too. So that's going to make her even more kind of maybe reticent to maybe show herself. And I think one thing we need to remember about Pluto is that Pluto was the god of invisibility and wore the helmet of invisibility. So, sometimes for Pluto rising people, we can feel like people don't notice us, or if they do notice us, they notice us for the wrong reasons. And so, there definitely is that energy going on there with her Pluto rising. But one thing I think we should keep in mind looking at astrology charts is the closer a planet is to our ascendant, the more powerful impact it's going to have on personality and who we are. And you can see Jupiter is like far more closer to her ascendant than Pluto is. And so Pluto is there in her first house, but as far as the energy that she's radiating, or that she's in, she's very much that Cancerian Jupiter rising, kind, soft, sweet, gentle, all those different things, very yin type of energy, right? And when you think of women like in show business back in the day, you're thinking of people like maybe like Elizabeth Taylor, or, people who were maybe a little bit more yang, although she was a multiple Pisces, I believe. I think about her chart, but I don't know what her rising is. But you think about women back in the day acting as leading ladies, and you're thinking of like a confident, no nonsense woman going in there and like, I'm doing this and I'm doing that. And, look at me, I'm Sandra D, all that stuff. But she wasn't really like that. And it probably cost her when it came to roles and it came to being perceived as being confident. And, so the one part about Cancer rising or Cancer energy in general is one could be afraid or a little bit timid or lacking in self-esteem, not commanding or hogging all the attention. And she does have her, like I said, her sun in the 7th house in Aquarius. So she kind of gains part of her identity and who she is through her partner and through, the approval of her partner, which was very important to her in her relationship with Roman Polanski. And we will talk about that. And, we see that sun opposition Pluto from the 7th house to the 1st house. And so she was looking for men who had a lot of charisma or had a lot of power or, had the qualities that she felt she didn't have in herself. And so I think that's also really evident in her chart as well. And some directors, like I said, commenting on her lack of star power, or commenting that it was very hard to bring emotion out of her. Like she's got these very emotional eyes, very emotional face, but her moon is in Virgo square Saturn. So she's not going to be like bubbling all her emotions to the surface. And, she's very Aquarian too, right? So she also said that a lot of people mistook her shyness for aloofness. And aloofness is a quality that we find in Aquarius energy. So, there is this kind of, as sweet and caring and loving as a person that she is, there's also this maybe like not like breaking down and showing a lot of emotion. There's a story of a director who's like, do something, cry, yell, scream. And she's kind of like, what? Like she didn't really understand it, which I think is really moon and Virgo square Saturn, like it's like the emotions are there, but Saturn has a way of, not letting us kind of like fly off the handle and not letting our emotions kind of run wild. And moon in Virgo is kind of very, practical moon. So it's not like all over the place, like, passionate, going crazy, that type of thing. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about her vibe. So she definitely didn't walk into the room like she owned the place. That wasn't her. She was very demure, very bashful, very unassuming, very humble. Okay. Ruler of her ascendant square Saturn, very humble. Saturn brings a humble energy. But she also was very like cool and trendy and like nomadic, like she kind of lived all over the place. Her and Roman had a apartment in London and then a house in Hollywood. And growing up, her father was in the military and they lived in Italy for a while. And, with Jupiter rising, I would expect that she'd have maybe, especially because Jupiter rules her 9th house of foreign travel, living abroad. It doesn't surprise me that she lived in Italy or that, her husband had homes overseas. Like, there is that Jupiterian influence of wanting to explore and go different places. But interestingly, she always wanted to come back to the US, even when they were in Italy, and that Jupiter is retrograde. So it's like she kept wanting to come back to the US because all the big acting opportunities were in Hollywood. And so even though she was in like amazing Italy, she kept trying to go back to the US, which I think is very, Jupiter retrograde I'm going back, Jupiter's ruling my 9th house of travel, but I'm trying to go back to the US. So I think that that's kind of interesting too. And let's see what else. So yeah, always trying to, Jupiter rising, very lucky opportunities, meeting the right people, very beautiful, very generous, loving personality, hospitable, welcoming to guests in her home, very Jupiterian. All of that, and treated everyone like a friend, Sun in Aquarius in the 7th house, treating everyone like a nice friend. Sun trine Neptune, everyone's my friend. I'm open for anything. She said that in interviews before, like I'm open to anything or trying anything. Very open energy. And so let's see what else. And very modern and fun loving too. Like, she has her Sun trine Uranus, very open, loving, fun loving, kind of, Uranus and Neptune, very hippie vibes, free love, go with the flow, man, all that type of energy that was happening in the 60s. And let's talk a little bit about her Jupiter, because a lot of people never really could find any fault with Sharon and said she had a very agreeable nature, which to me is that Jupiter rising. And Mia Farrow, who was a fellow actress, called her a sweet and pure human being. Now, when we talk about like something that's sweet and pure, we're really talking about like the 3 gunas. And for those of you that have studied gunas and studied some, Indian philosophy, Vedic astrology, something like that, then we can talk about the 3 gunas, and one of the gunas as sattvic. And the nature of Jupiter is very sattvic. And that nature is, delighting in happiness, peace, wellness, freedom, love, compassion, empathy, friendliness, cheerfulness, being non-judgmental towards people. Sattvic actually means light, goodness, and purity. All the planets have a guna that they are associated with, and Jupiter is associated with that, clear, pure, sattvic, light type of energy. And so we can see that really coming through in her chart. There's an innocence there, as we talked about. And, one thing I feel about Sharon is that she's one of those people that if you're with her and you're her partner, she actually helps you become a better person through her goodness. And I think that that's very evident because this Jupiter, by the 5-degree rules, technically in the first house, and that Jupiter is smiling back at her 7th house. And so to me, that light of Jupiter is also shining to her house of partnerships, which, kind of says, and Roman Polanski said some really, beautiful things about her. And you really did get the impression through their relationship, it was almost like she was making him a better person, although he didn't turn out to be that good, at the time, it kind of seemed that way, like her goodness and her qualities of, innocence and caring and generosity were like rubbing off on the people that she was around. And Roman Polanski had this to say about her. He said, Sharon was utterly good. She was the kindest human being I've ever met, with extreme patience. Look at her sun trine Saturn. She was the kindest human being I met with extreme patience. She never had a bad temper. She was never moody. Okay, that's crazy, right? Cancer rising. She was never moody. She enjoyed being a wife. Okay. And I mean, I'm sure she would have enjoyed being a mother too. Like I mentioned, she was 8.5 months when she was murdered, but, he's just saying she's an utterly good person, the kindest human being, extremely patient with him and everyone. You can see that sun trine Saturn quality of patience, very loving, nurturing person. And the idea that you get is that, she was a real goddess of a woman, and the crazy thing about it is that I don't think she really saw it about herself. And we'll talk about why that is, like she was all these beautiful things, but I think she had a hard time, connecting with maybe like, her own beauty or her own confidence with who she was. And so it's just crazy how you can be, at the time, she was literally one of the most beautiful women in the entire world, but how she could still have such a low confidence in herself, but at the same time be the most beautiful woman in the world. It's very fascinating, and we will talk about why that is. And as I mentioned, because she has Jupiter and Cancer there, she's exemplifying all the best qualities of Cancer, the highest ideals of Cancer. And she was taken from this world before she could be seen as anything less than perfect. She died when she was 26 years old. And so, she's like this legend of a woman, this bright, beautiful star. And that wasn't really polluted by the world. She was not polluted like water. When you think about a beautiful stream that isn't polluted, that's pure and clean and refreshing. And she was that kind of soul, like pure, clean, refreshing, beautiful soul who didn't even know like how beautiful she even was. And so I think that is very fascinating too. People have said that her murder at the end of the 1960s was the end and the loss of innocence. And like after that happened on August 9th, 1969, that the 60s were over. Like no more trusting, no more free love, no more like opening doors to everyone, hitchhiking everywhere, like no more of that. After her death, it like scared everybody and shocked everybody to the point where it's like, it's over. The 60s are over. And you can see, her Pluto rising and the huge impact that her life has had on, just culture, society, like changing everything in a lot of ways. And and Pluto, we're going to talk about Pluto tonight. Now, I want to say a couple things about Pluto, because yes, Pluto can be associated with brutal eliminations and like amputations of things. And it can be associated with villains and victims. Pluto can also be associated with these things, these very harsh things. But Pluto is also there for our like unconscious evolution. And I'm going to talk about what Pluto was trying to remind Sharon of, and not just, her murder, but also what Pluto was trying to teach her and show her. So we're going to go a little bit deeper in our Pluto discussion tonight and talk about, what those things are as we go deeper. And so Pluto in the first, talking about, as I mentioned, Sharon Tate was like a sex symbol. She never saw herself as that. And I talked about how Pluto can be associated with victims, and, Sharon's became a huge symbol for victim rights movement after her death. Her mother really carried the torch, Sharon's mother, and she became like a symbol for victims' rights. And her mom was, advocating for like keeping the people that hurt her in jail and not letting them out on parole and all these things. And so she in general became this huge symbol for victims' rights, which is very much like a Pluto rising type of an energy. And one thing to remember about Sharon Tate with the Pluto rising is that she did play in a lot of movies that were like horror type of movies. Like she played in the movie Fearless Vampire Killers. She played in the movie called Eye of the Devil, where she played a witch who was like, I think she was like doing a blood sacrifice for the land. And she did play a woman in the movie Valley of the Dolls, where it's three women struggling in Hollywood in the darkness of fame. And so these themes in the movies that she played are very much like a Plutonian theme. Vampires, definitely Plutonian, the occult, witches, the Eye of the Devil, like these types of movies, very taboo, occulty type of movies that she played in, very Plutonian. I would say too, like there wasn't really, I don't think at that point there was a concept maybe of like a scream queen in movies, but she could have also been maybe kind of in that genre a little bit, I think, in that kind of horror genre. And so I think that Pluto rising is interesting with the roles that she played. She also like made comments to people that when she was in different houses and things, she could like feel the energy of ghosts and, kind of could feel that energy, which is very Plutonian. It's very like, psychic or mediumship, occult energy. And in the 1960s, a lot of people were obsessed with the occult and Christianity and Satanism. And, they were obsessed with a lot of those things. There was a lot of different movies talking about that. And some people said like, because she made Eye of the Devil, that she got into paganism or something, but that may be a rumor. I don't know, but you can kind of see the roles she's playing and she's doing are on those Plutonian lines. And so that is very interesting for her to play those roles. Also, Sharon wanted to study psychiatry when she was younger before she decided to become an actress. And, Pluto is very much associated, with that energy, with like deep observation of humanity and also, studying of the mind. She's got that Mercury opposite Pluto, very much like an analysis, psychiatry type of an energy. And so that also makes sense with the Pluto rising, because at first I was looking at her chart and I'm like, she just seems like so genuine and good and kind and caring. And I'm like, what is she doing with Pluto rising? And I mean, I have Pluto rising in my chart. I'm one to talk, but I'm like, where's the Pluto rising coming in here? And then I started looking at her movie roles and I was like, oh, okay, there it is. And I was also starting to dial into her relationships. And we're going to talk more about Pluto in the context of her relationships and how, they really showed up in her relationships as well, which, like I said, Pluto's in her first house, casting its rays over to the seventh house of relationships against her Sun and Mercury. So we will talk about that too. And there was one quote that I have from Sharon Tate that actually seemed very Plutonian. I couldn't find any. She did mention something about her life being totally ruled by fate, which is very Plutonian. But this was really the only quote that I could find that was in my mind by her that was Plutonian. And the quote was, by the time you get to the point where you can run your own career, they call you a bitch. I thought that was so funny. All right. By the time you get to the point, because it's talking about like being able to run your thing and have power over you and what you do and not be at the mercy of other people. And by the time you get that, they call you a bitch. That's very Pluto for her to say that. But I wasn't finding a lot of stuff like that, though, like Plutonic things that she was saying. And anyway, so let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the Venus K2 South Node conjunction in her 8th house. Now, here's the thing that's important about this Venus K2 and why I'm calling this doomed beauty, because Venus, of course, is the planet of beauty. And in her chart, this Venus is in a quincunx to her ascendant. And so is the South Node. Both of these are in a quincunx to her ascendant. And the Venus is particularly tight. It's by 1 degree, off by 1 degree. And less than a degree. No, sorry. Yeah, no, it's 1 degree, less than 1 degree. That Venus is in a quincunx with her ascendant. And, a quincunx is an aspect of aversion. It's different than an opposition. It's different than a square. It's an aspect where the two planets or the 2 points indicated are at a, weird angle to each other. It's a 150-degree angle. And it basically means that they don't see each other too well, or the planets have gone deliberately out of their way to kind of avoid people, and they're having to avoid each other, and they're having a hard time integrating the energies. And we also see quincunxes in medical astrology a lot too popping up. But in this case, I was talking to you guys earlier about how she really had a hard time thinking about herself as quote unquote sexy or beautiful, and that she really didn't identify with that. And she found it kind of weird. And actually, she felt her beauty worked against her in getting roles. And so you can see the planet of beauty, Venus, is in the 8th house, and it's, it's in an aversion to her. So she's not really connecting with herself that way. She's a very beautiful, kind, caring, generous, loving human being, but she's not really seeing herself as maybe beautiful or valuable, or that she, she's maybe missing out on that confidence or that, feminine beauty, power kind of thing. And Venus is also the planet of relationships. And so her relationships are in an aversion to her, saying that, maybe she's not making the best decisions for herself when it comes to relationships, or, maybe she puts a really low value on physical appearances as well. And, an aversion could definitely mean that. So she's at an aversion with Venus. And to me, it's just saying, it doesn't really matter what my partner looks like. I'm not really going for looks anyway. And, interestingly, her husband, like I said, compared to her, let's go back and look at these two again. He's like way shorter than her. She's like a stunning beauty. And he's over here, like, hiding behind her like a little gremlin. Like, he's okay. He's 9 years older than her. He probably has like a Napoleon complex or short man's complex. I don't know. I'm not trying to be mean, but it's like, he's very, very direct, and he's very, aggressive, but he's also like, you're thinking, what is this like gorgeous woman doing, marrying this guy? But I think she was also attracted to his charisma and his power and his intelligence as well, too, and his artistry and, his confidence when it came to his own artistry as a director. Like, I think she was more attracted to those qualities rather than, how he looked, or that he was like way shorter than her and had to like jump up to like kiss her. I think she was not caring about those qualities. And, really an aversion could be where it's like, I don't really care. Like, I'm not going for someone because of how they look. And I don't really want to be known for how I look either. I'm much deeper than just how I look. And so you can see that aspect of aversion there. And I wrote here, as beautiful as she was, she didn't connect with her own beauty. And here's her quote. I've read I'm supposed to be Hollywood's new sex symbol. I think I am the most unsexy thing that ever was. I'm open for everything, of course, right? Jupiter rising. I'm open for everything, of course, but I'm certainly not aware of being sexy. Isn't that interesting? And then her Venus is in an aversion to her. I'm not aware of being sexy. My Venus is an aversion to me in the 8th house. I don't see it. I don't know what it's about. Other people think I am, but I don't know. And she doesn't want attention really for like being sexy. And she's gorgeous on the inside, Jupiter rising, but she's unaware almost of her outside beauty. And she has her Venus in Aquarius, which can be, Venus in Aquarius could be a little bit more shy or aloof or distant. Venus in Aquarius could be very social or wanting to connect that way, but more maybe intellectual and less about how people are looking. And so I also think that that is what's coming through here too. And, she has like some quotes about being sexy, like even a flower wilts and dies. And, some of the most, she said, picking up a fork can be sexy. Can you believe that? That's like somebody with Venus and aversion to their ascendant. Like just picking up a fork can be sexy if you want it to be. Anyway, so she's very detached from what's sexy in like the normal sense. And, she's lacking in confidence a little bit, as we said. And she did get very annoyed with only being seen as a vapid, empty starlet. She wants to be seen as something deeper than that. Cancer rising. Okay. And it's interesting because other women, now, if we think about what's a planet in our chart that represents women or our relationships with women, we could say that would be Venus or the moon. But a lot of other women were jealous of her, didn't want to be friends with her, didn't want to, Elizabeth Taylor was very jealous of her, actually, and made some weird comments about her, I think. And so, you can see the planet that represents women is in her 8th house and an aversion to her. And it's like, women are not really connecting with her as much either, because she's very beautiful. She doesn't know it, and they're jealous, and she's probably very nice to them and very sweet to them. And probably they're thinking, oh, it's only an act, but it's not. So it's a very interesting energy with her. Now, I want to talk a little bit about Venus K2, because that Venus is in a conjunction with K2, the planet of past lives, and saying that, she has in this lifetime, she's meeting people from her past lives again, and it's possibly hurtful or harmful for her. And, or that there is just something very unorthodox and non-traditional about the relationships that she chooses, because K2, is very instinctual and it just kind of goes where it goes. And K2 is very abnormal, and K2 can represent something that we don't really understand. So other people not really understanding, like, why did you pick this guy who's really not as attractive of, like, why'd you pick this guy? Like, he's a cheater. He doesn't even live here half the time. He's living over in London. Like, why pick him? And you might look at them as a couple and go, what's with the guy? Like, why'd you pick that guy? And I think that that's very Venus K2. Also keep in mind other people's charts that we've looked at who have Venus K2. Britney Spears has Venus K2 in her chart. And, Britney Spears married her childhood best friend for 72 hours and then divorced, and then they annulled their marriage like 72 hours later. And, she's picked some interesting men too. Kevin Federline, it's like, okay, that loser or whatever, but she's had some, so Venus K2 can be talking about, very unusual relationships, unorthodox, non-traditional relationships. And, a quote by Sharon Tate is like, Roman tells me things and I believe him, so basically he's like, telling her things and she kind of knows that he's cheating. She found videos with him with other women, like screwing other women on their bed. Like, there's rumors that he would like invite, women over all the time for like threesomes. I mean, he's kind of just doing his own thing sexually, but, she's like looking the other way because she loves him. So it's this whole Venus K2 thing. Now, keep in mind that Venus is also opposing Chiron. So we can talk about, pain, disappointment. And a lot of people thought she may have been wanting to divorce Roman Polanski after she had her baby. Like, some people have said that, and I'll explain why that was. But, Venus Chiron could be, regrets in relationships or picking relationships that are very detrimental because you're not having, confidence in yourself, or wounds in relationships, and, letting the other person have all the power in the relationship. Like, we can see some of these themes coming up with Venus K2. Now, so we talked about Britney Spears and how K2 can be abnormal, weird, different relationships. What is a beautiful girl like her doing with him? But, she respected him as a director, and look at her son, Mercury there. And she respected his art and the way that he looked at life. And she adored him, according to what people said. And she was oftentimes, because she did adore him, she was trying to please him. And, at times he could be very intimidating because he was one of those directors that was a perfectionist. So he would make you do 70 shots until he got the shot out of you that he wanted. And so, her trying to please him was very important. There's a story that she was in Mexico with him and he complimented her dress. And because of that, she went to a tailor and had 9 dresses made exactly the same as that dress, just because he complimented her. So you can see this, sun in the 7th house, like wanting to please him, wanting him to be happy, wanting, we can see there's a power differential in the relationship, sun opposite Pluto. Okay. And, she really, I feel like at some point she was thinking her beauty was actually holding her back from getting the opportunities that she was seeking, and that her beauty was a liability, not a benefit. And people would often try to make her like less beautiful, like make her wear wigs or do other things to kind of hide her beauty a little bit, which is very Plutonian, right? Because they were afraid people wouldn't take her as seriously. So you can see how like her beauty almost in the 8th house is where we find liabilities, where we find things that are challenging to deal with, or certain things that we look at in our life that are like liabilities. And I think that that's interesting because the 8th house is like represents debt and borrowing money. And the second house represents our money. So the second house would, or the eighth house, if it's a borrowing debt type of a house, then it definitely represents a liability, So planets in the eighth house could be associated with things that we view as a liability, okay, in our own lives that we're having to work with. And let's see what else. So the eighth house can represent difficulties in life, lessons around things in life. And because she has Venus there, relationships, self-worth, value, beauty, the way that, relationships can be like manipulating at times, all these types of things coming up for her. And let's see what else we have. So let's go. And like I said before, perhaps attraction isn't really something that she valued that much in her relationships. Like it wasn't important for her partner to be ridiculously good looking. There were other qualities she was looking for. And so it's interesting, with Venus K2 in the eighth house, quincunx her ascendant, perhaps she was very sensitive to being rejected by a partner or like not being seen as good enough. I also feel at times she had to hide her jealousy as well. And she had to hide what she was feeling because she knew that he was trying to hook up with other women. But she also, as his comment, she never complained about anything. She was never moody with him. She was patient with him. So that also makes me feel like maybe she was kind of, because the eighth house can be where we're like hiding things or pushing things away or not wanting to look at them. The eighth house, planets in the eighth house can represent things that need transformation or need change. So it's like my relationships and the way that I act in them need change in this lifetime, but I'm also struggling to do that. So I think that is coming up too. And, so let's see, she may see how certain, Venus in the South Node, she may fail to see how certain relationships may not be good for her and that she's afraid to lose the relationship. So she kind of puts up with it, as beautiful as she was. And, I wonder if there was pressure too from Roman Polanski, like, how we have these contracts with people that we never really talk about, but we know they're underneath the surface. Like, I shouldn't complain about him being with other women, and lucky him because he picked a woman that has, moon square Saturn, right? So I'm not going to show any emotions. I'm not going to fly off the handle. I'm not going to go crazy. Moon in Virgo, very practical. Just keep going, think about it later. That type of energy. Okay. And the other thing that I think is interesting too, that Sharon Tate, because she was always moving around and she was kind of like, a military brat living all over the place because her father was in the military, is that she lost friends all the time. And that made her want to get to know more people as she was older. But when she was younger, she couldn't really hold on to friends because of how they were moving around. And you can see the ruler of her 11th house of friends is in the 8th house. Okay. Also, I feel she knew some of these friends that she had, especially the people that she died with. One of her really good friends, Jay Sebring, was there at the house when she was killed. And my whole thing, and she used to date him, but then at the time when she died, he was just a very, very good friend. My feeling is that she knew him in a past life, or, what's very interesting is she died with her friends. Now, when we think about the 8th house as being, like a house of death and decay, and we see the ruler of her 4th house is ruled by Venus, and also the ruler of her 11th house of friends is also ruled by Venus, then we can see, she died at home with her friends. And, very sad what happened. It was, Sharon wasn't just murdered. It was also her friends that were murdered too. And so, she did die at her home with her friends, ruler of the 4th and ruler of the 11th in the 8th house of death and decay. And so I find that intriguing about how that happened. Now let's go ahead and I want to take a look here at her moon. So we've looked at her ascendant. We've looked at the aspects to her ascendant. Now let's look at the ruler of her ascendant. So the ruler of her ascendant is this moon in Virgo. Now, right away, this moon isn't making very many aspects in the chart. It is squaring Saturn and it is sextiling that Jupiter. And I want to talk a little bit about moon square Saturn, moon in the third house and Virgo square Saturn in the 11th. And what's really interesting about this moon square Saturn is, I mentioned before that Sharon was born into a military household and her father was like very stoic and didn't show a lot of emotion, but was very quiet. But, that's very moon Saturn, right? And when you have somebody who's like in the military like that, you don't want to be like a ragey, fly off the handle type of person if you want to have a long career, right? You do have to be like stoic about the things that you do and see and hear. And you want to be in control of your emotions and you want to limit your like flying off the handle so that you can think clearly and take actions and like have good common sense, And I feel like with Sharon, it's interesting that Roman Polanski was like, she was never moody. She was totally patient with me, and she's a Cancer rising. So it's like, she's never moody. But I also think with that moon in Virgo square Saturn, like, there is an emotional discipline or a stoicism within her that perhaps she inherited from her father, where she is not really like flying off the handle. Like, if anything, she's restricting her emotions and she's keeping her emotions like small and compartmentalized, moon in Virgo, and letting little pieces of it out here and there, but not going crazy with it. And I also feel with her moon in Virgo in the third house ruling her ascendant, that she was like an amazing host and like did so many things for her friends without ever complaining. That Saturn is in the 11th house. And she's one of those people, they said, Roman Polanski said that she was an amazing cook. And when they got married, she started making Polish dishes. They'd have all their friends over for dinner parties. She'd be cooking and serving and hosting. Very Jupiter rising, also very moon in Virgo, like, showing I love you by like doing things for friends and kind of, really like being a very humble person, which is something you don't see very often in like Hollywood, right? You don't often see moon square Saturn people like, big egos, big energy. Moon square Saturn is exactly opposite of that. And, she did mention about her dad that she never resented the strict upbringing that she had because it taught her how to be disciplined and it taught her how to, work. And she has Sun trine Saturn as well. So, Sun Saturn, if it's in a difficult aspect, can represent resenting your father, but it's in a trine, it's in a beautiful aspect. And she's like, I don't, resent my father for being stoic. Like, he taught me discipline and working hard. So I think that's a very interesting energy too. Now, with that moon in Virgo, I have a quote that I found very interesting that I think is very moon in Virgo. And it says, I'm happier when I'm working. I don't have that much to think about that way. And that's very moon in Virgo because the moon is about your happiness and how you're feeling. Moon in Virgo is like, I need something to do. I need to be productive. I need to work. I need to keep myself, a little distracted so I'm not in my feelings all the time. And I think that is very much looks right with her chart. I'm like, oh yeah, she's on point with that, with her chart. And she's thankful for growing up in a strict household that talked about discipline and the practical nature of the moon in Virgo. And, I can't fly off the handle at the dinner table. My dad will discipline me, or, I'm expected to sit down at the dinner table, finish all my food and get up and say, may I be excused, like a regimen, And so I think when she's with Roman Polanski, like she's not complaining. And here's the thing about Sharon Tate is I think she actually has a lot more mental toughness than people gave her credit for. Like people, oh, she's just kind of like, sweet and caring and gentle and nice. But underneath there is a very, Moon in Virgo square Saturn is a very tough, cookie who, mentally knows how to handle herself, knows how to discipline her emotions. And, that's probably why Roman Polanski said that. Now, keep in mind that the planet that represents her partner in the chart is the ruler of the seventh house, which is this Saturn. And so she's in a square, Moon square Saturn. Now she's in a square to her partner as Moon square Saturn. So that makes me think at times she was kind of like emotionally disciplining herself, and she wasn't allowing herself to maybe have a reaction to some of the things that he was doing, and that she was maybe being very reserved about over showing her emotions towards him, probably sensing that he wouldn't like that. And, what's interesting is that Roman Polanski also mentioned that Sharon told him when she was living in Italy at an army base that she was sexually assaulted by a soldier on that base. And she never told anyone this except for Roman Polanski, right? But he said Sharon was never like mentally scarred by that at all, which I'm like, okay, which makes me feel like, all of us handle things in different ways. I'm not saying, it's wrong for her to handle something a particular way, but I also think that may be a bit of a lie too, because I just wonder if she's maybe pushing away those emotions, or, putting on a happy face or a cheerful face, but kind of pushing away the hard things, or being reserved about it. Not really like, no, that didn't really affect me. And as I mentioned before, directors would say, oh, she has this amazing face, eyes full of emotion, but they couldn't get emotion out of her. Like they would be like, yell, scream, go crazy, like show us some emotion. And she was just she was stoic about it. And so I think that affected her acting as well. And I think that her stoicism and the way that she was, like her mental toughness, was greatly underplayed. I think she has a lot of mental toughness, but I also think it got in the way of her acting. And yes, so Moon in Virgo, trine Mars in Capricorn. Yes, I feel awful whenever I'm not working. Cult yoga, yeah. You feel bad when you're not working. Cult yoga says here they have Moon in Virgo, trine Mars in Capricorn. Well, Mars in Capricorn, exalted, right? Hardworking energy. And oh, wow, I have the Moon square Saturn too, and Sun and Venus in Aquarius. I love that when people join in and the chart that I'm reading is like things that are happening in their chart. I think there's like not a lot of coincidences in this world, but yeah, I think Sharon Tate, like she's known for being very sweet and kind and gentle, but I also think there's a level of mental toughness there that she has, and that stoicism of Saturn. And so I find that very interesting. And let's see what else we've got going on. So she has Moon in Virgo in the third house. The third house is a house associated with self-effort. And, the third house is also a house associated with acting. Now, I would say the other house associated with acting is the fifth house, but the third house is also very strongly associated with acting, drama, singing, etc. The fifth house too as well. But as we know, she was trying so hard to be an actress. And, she did act in some movies, but she had to train for 7 years. Like they had her on a 7-year contract where she was basically owned by the studio. They could do with whatever they wanted with her, but they kept telling her that she wasn't prepared and that she wasn't ready and that she needed more training. And, she's trying so hard, that Moon in Virgo, working hard, trying hard, training. And she has mentioned that acting is really hard work. And they sent her to all these different schools and trainings to become a better actor. But she kept getting limited, that Moon square Saturn. She kept getting roles that were like easy, or where she didn't like the storyline. Or I'll tell you guys one of the lines that she had to say at a audition that she went to audition for a character, and it's downright humiliating. And they told her, that you have to say this line because this character is like you. So it's like, okay, and with Saturn, there's a fine line between being humble and being humiliated. And so we can see that energy with her as an actor and like working so hard to become an actor, but at the same time, not really being recognized for a lot of that. And that's very much like a moon square Saturn type of a thing. Oh my gosh, DG. Yay, it's so good to see you. I love that. I'm over here with Venus and Neptune in the 8th. Yes, I remember your chart. I always remember that about you. And, it'd be interesting to see if your Venus is in a quincunx to your ascendant, because that's really, interesting energy. And I oftentimes think the South Node behaves a little bit like Neptune. It really can. So we see that energy. And so we're going to talk about her career as well with the moon square Saturn, because the moon's very important in her chart because she is a Cancer rising. And so the moon is the ruler of her ascendant. So when the ruler of your chart is square Saturn, things take time. You have to be patient and you have to work hard, and there's not always results for everything you do right away. And, so she's dealing with all of this as an actress. Now, let's go ahead and see. Father was stoic, serious, quiet. Whenever she talks in interviews, she has like the sweetest voice, but she's not like overly emotional. She has a very like patient, calm delivery, very moon Saturn. Going out of her way to do things for friends and neighbors. I'm guessing she does that all the time with this moon square Saturn. Third house being associated with acting and drama. She tried so very hard and worked so very hard to become a better actress, but found limitations in the roles that she was given, as we talked about with that Saturn. And, with Saturn and Gemini, I feel like, Gemini is a very versatile, it's probably the most versatile sign of all the signs. It's mutable airs, very versatile. So she's looking for different types of roles and more versatility in her acting. But Saturn is like, Saturn sometimes can be that, no, you have to work harder. It doesn't mean, no, you're not ever going to get it, but it does mean, no, not right now, or no, you have to work harder. And I think that she was really under that Saturnian influence for sure, especially when it came to her acting career. And she's struggling against the prejudice against her. She's a very humble person, moon in Virgo square Saturn, almost too humble. She's almost too humble, as I mentioned. And she's accepting 7-year contracts with an agent where they can put her on whatever movie they want, and kind of very like, and also too, I read a story about one of her agents when she was trying to date someone. That agent didn't want her to date that person and demanded that she break up with that person and forced her to break up with him. Now, again, that's very Sun Pluto. And when we look at the 7th house of people that we're in business with, like our agents and things like that, because the 7th house is also a house of business and partnerships, a strong house for business. But, she has agents that she's working with, and they're forcing her to like break up with certain people, Sun opposite Pluto, 7th house, 1st house, a little too controlling, a little too much, and a lot too much, actually. And, a lot of those directors saying that she's very timid and shy. And, that moon square Saturn can be very timid and shy, particularly Cancer rising, very yin type of energy. And, here's my thing. I think Sharon had trouble trusting her own instincts as an actor because, when we're acting, we have to be very much in the present moment emotionally. And Moon in Virgo has a tendency to overthink things. And so, squaring Saturn, I think she might have had a hard time trusting her instincts as an actor. And I also think that that might have worked against her. And, it did affect how much money she could make too. The 11th house is also a house that represents the profits from our career. Second house from the 10th house, the profits from our career. And that moon in the third house is squaring that Saturn in the 11th house of profits from career. And so it was a limiting factor, and the third house is definitely a house where we want movement and we want to see things moving. But Saturn is like, no, it's not moving. You have to work harder. You have to do more, which is tough. It said that there was a director named Mark Robinson who treated her like she was an imbecile. That's what one of her actress friends said. And that when directors treated her like she was an imbecile, that she could always feel it, and that she was very sensitive and attuned to people treating her like an imbecile or like she wasn't very smart, and I think that that's Moon Saturn crap, like it's tough with Moon Saturn. You're taught to be humble and to work hard. And especially with Jupiter rising, like things may come easy or certain things may come easy, but the hard work and dedication definitely has to be there. Now, let's see what else. Okay. So what does she do, right? She feels inadequate, or she feels timid, or she feels like, she made a comment about herself where she's like, I'm not under any illusions. I don't think I'm going to be like doing Shakespeare, And that comment is just kind of interesting to me, because it's like, is she kind of like putting herself down or saying she doesn't think that like she's very smart or that type of thing? But it's interesting the way that she kind of mentioned that, I found. So what does she go do then? Because she's experiencing these limitations around what she can do, is she goes and marries a very powerful director named Roman Polanski, who at the time was very wealthy, who was like the hottest of the hot, making movies, and Roman Polanski, like I said, her husband, who was a director that she met working with him on a film, they actually didn't like each other at first. Venus, K2 in the 8th house, they didn't even like each other at first. She didn't like him, he didn't like her, but then they ended up getting together. And we're going to talk more about him and what he's like, but she goes and she marries a very powerful director with a lot of pull in Hollywood, which is very, at the same time, it had the ability to change her, situation as an actress, but also marrying like such a powerful, notable man when you're just kind of like up and coming is probably intimidating. And a lot of people did say that, even though she loved him, she was also intimidated by him, so very interesting there. And some of her comments about her husband, Roman Polanski, she said, Roman is strong and true and honest. I don't like glamour boys. Okay. Now, the ruler of her 7th house of relationships is this Saturn in Gemini, trine the sun in Aquarius. Okay. He's true and he's honest. Sun trine Saturn. He's true and he's honest. And I don't like glamour boys. I like people with some substance, is what she is saying. And like she's saying there's a quality of realness in him. Like he's not like bullshitting her. And, Roman Polanski, he wasn't, I told you guys at the beginning of this video that he later in life got in trouble for, assaulting young girls and going after young, really, really underage women, like not great. Obviously horrible. But Roman Polanski, let's think of the way that Sharon looked at him. Let's look through her eyes, because she is sitting in her first house, okay, feeling, a little bit inadequate, feeling like she's not meeting her goals, right? Moon square Saturn. And she meets this brilliant director who has the power to like change her life. And of course, Sun in Aquarius with Mercury in Aquarius retrograde, Sun Mercury is like a very brilliant combination. If you have, and Mercury is always very close to the sun in general, but that Mercury is very, very close to that sun. And to me, she's looking at him like, wow, he's so smart. He's so genius. He's like an amazing businessman. Sun Mercury is very much like a business, a businessman or woman type of a combination in Aquarius. Like, he has some really interesting ideas about the world and his philosophy on things and his ideas and the way he talks. And wow, it's just so powerful. And, you can kind of see what's already going on there between those two. Now, let's go ahead and, okay, so I want to tell you guys about what the director made her say when she was auditioning for Valley of the Dolls. And they told her, hey, Sharon, you would be perfect for this part because this character is a lot like you. And then when she screen tested for the role, they told her to say the following words. I can't believe this. I've only got 2 cents worth of talent. All I've got is a body. Wow, that is harsh. And you can see that moon square Saturn, like I talked about. I've only got 2 cents worth of talent. All I've got is a body. Yikes, right? And so Saturn's influence of severity, reductionism, retrogression, mediocrity, meekness, hesitation, all of this showing up as the harshness of Saturn. Now, again, Saturn isn't there to just beat us with a whip. Saturn is helping us become better by, holding the whip over us and telling us work harder, work more, do more, become more, reach further, try more. And so, but there's also an element there that's humiliating in a way, the way that they were talking to her and treating her is also humiliating. So that is not right. And that could also be like her kind of like, like caving in on self or not feeling good enough, that humiliation. But Saturn also has to do with the doggedness of sticking to it anyway, even if somebody is treating you a particular way, or it's like, I'm going to stick with it anyway. I'm going to keep trying. I'm going to persevere. That's very much a Saturn energy. And she did have that. And as I mentioned, I feel she has a mental toughness people did not give her enough credit for. And we can also see the ruler of her ascendant is in a sextile to Jupiter. I don't spend as much time on sextiles, but in this case, I will mention it because she always had such a positive can-do attitude. And she always was like so upbeat, I feel like, or just very nice or charming to people. Had a very positive attitude, like I'll keep trying, I'll keep doing it. Like that's very much a Jupiter thing, but it's also like, is she being too humble? And that Jupiter is also in a quincunx to that Venus. So it's like, am I giving too much to my relationships? Am I, putting my partner on a pedestal? Am I, showering them with love, but, am I getting treated badly? Like that type of energy. And, so let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about her relationship with Roman Polanski, the director who she married. Now, she was 8.5 months pregnant with his baby when she was brutally murdered, as I mentioned. But let's talk about their relationship a little bit more because, first off, we want to look at the planets in the 7th house because that's going to tell us something about the personality of the person that we're with. And we see the sun in Aquarius and Mercury retrograde in Aquarius in the 7th house. Now, I'm going to read you guys a comment that Sharon Tate made about Roman Polanski. She said, I've learned a lot about me from being with Roman. Don't you guys think that's a huge sun in the 7th house type of a comment? I've learned a lot about me by being with my partner. And, that's a good thing in a sense that we learn about who we are from being with other people, but it could also be a negative in the sense that, that person could have too much influence and power over us, right? Sun opposite Pluto. And here's another comment she made, another quote. I used to read Zen and yoga books, but Roman doesn't read. So I don't read now. Okay. And that Mercury retrograde, Roman doesn't read. So I don't read. Now, granted, he was too busy writing scripts and, doing things like that as a director and a writer to really, read for pleasure, I think. But, Mercury retrograde in Aquarius, Roman doesn't read. I used to read a lot of Zen and yoga books, but Roman, my partner, doesn't read, so I'm not going to read, very Sun, Mercury in the 7th house. I thought that. And, what's funny is that, those two together were living like a very cool nomadic lifestyle. And I mentioned, he is represented by this Saturn in Gemini in a conjunction with Uranus. So here's the thing I want to say about him. I mean, he was a big, well-known director. He had money, he had financial stability. So not only is he giving her like the stability with the Sun trine Saturn, but he's also like allowing her to live a very different and unusual type of a life, okay, with that Sun trine Uranus. And we can see that huge grand trine and air in her chart that also includes her husband. And that grand trine and air is hitting all 3 air houses in the astrology chart, the 11th house, the 7th, and the 3rd. So of course, they're like a very social couple. Of course, they're like living in different places. Of course, they're like hosting a lot of people at their house. Of course, they're like getting to know tons of people. It's a very airy type of a relationship, and it's involving around, freedom, self-expression, like going all over the place, living a very cool nomadic type of a lifestyle, Sun trine Uranus, Sun trine Neptune, like just going all over the place type of energy. And, that was the thing people were doing back in the day. But, Roman Polanski, as I mentioned, was also like screwing a lot of women and would, famous for his infidelity in every single marriage that he's ever been in. And, we can see that Sun in the 7th house of partnerships opposite Pluto, very sexually obsessed with, getting his way. We could say that for sure is a manifestation of that. Very into some like darker, maybe taboo things, as far as, or maybe like, and there was some stories saying about how he would like bring girls home and like tell Sharon, you have to be a part of this. You need to be doing this too. Very sexually dominant is also what I feel about him as well. And, her attraction to dominant men, because she has that Pluto looking across at her 7th house, like, she's kind of wanting that dominating, take control. As I told you guys, Roman Polanski, her husband, I've looked at his chart. He has Mars rising in the 1st house. So he is like I said, aggressive, domineering, go, do, I'm doing what I want to do, maybe a little selfish at times too, but, very like sexually self-obsessed, that type of energy going on there too with him. And, he has a dark side, as we know. Later in life, he was, as we mentioned, arrested for assaulting, sexually assaulting a 13-year-old girl and many others, so he has a definite dark side. And of course, Sharon probably didn't know all that. She'd only been married to him for a year, and that case hadn't even come out yet. But, there's that thrill and that attraction of being with someone like that, and those kind of power dynamics that, are both nerve-wracking but exciting at the same time too. And I think there was that definitely going on. And he used to call like his infidelity, he would talk about how like he never believed in monogamy anyway, but when he would try to talk to Sharon about his infidelity or how he was doing with it or whatever, he would always refer to it as Sharon's little hang up, which is like, okay, dude, like, it's just weird that he called it that. But, as we mentioned, like Sharon's a very beautiful, gorgeous woman. But again, she's in a quincunx to her Venus. her moon is square Saturn. So she's very humble. She doesn't necessarily know how beautiful she is. And she's not, rubbing it in people's faces or anything. But she may, with Venus opposite Chiron, she may have actually low self-confidence when it comes to her beauty. And so, Roman Polanski started referring it to as her little hang up, which I think is, not great that he was talking about it like that. And DG says she seems to embody someone without protection and a voice that is silenced. I 1000% agree. And I do feel like she is looking for a protector. And that's very much like a Cancer rising, because she is very open and vulnerable. She is looking for a protector. And what's interesting about the silencing part of it is that, she has this Mercury opposite Pluto. In some of the books written about their relationship, it was said that she barely, like when they were in public together, she would barely speak. And she was always afraid of like talking when he was around and they were being interviewed or there was different things going on. Like she would be very quiet and like hardly say a word. But when she was alone with him, she would talk more, but not when they were out together, because I also feel like she was kind of afraid of maybe not looking very smart or whatever, or just looking like, challenging him or looking like she was challenging him in some way, or like challenging his brilliance in some way. Like there is this whole thing going on. And I completely agree with you, DG. I completely do that. Yeah, there is an element of looking for a protector, but also feeling silenced or not being able to challenge him verbally, even in public. Okay. And so I think that is very interesting. Now, if the seventh house planets tell us about what our partner is going to be like, she definitely wants a partner who's very social, friendly, interesting, many things to say, Sun and Mercury there. And, Sun and Mercury in Aquarius, of course, Aquarius having to do with high idealism, free thinkers, free will, okay, having free will. But the Sun opposite Pluto, Mercury opposite Pluto, the partner exerting, power over her free will is definitely a thing. And people did say that he was very controlling in some of the books, like many years later that were published, that said he would tell her like how to dress or what to wear. And he didn't like her with makeup. So he'd always be like, don't wear any makeup. That he had a very controlling energy towards her as well. So I think that is interesting how that happens there. And, what I find interesting too is that, when Sharon was coming back to the US and she was 8.5 months pregnant, like right before she got murdered, she was on a big, luxury boat back to the US. I think it was the Queen Victoria or something, on a boat from London back to the US. She couldn't fly because she was so pregnant. But can you imagine going to see your husband in a different country, 8.5 months pregnant, and then he doesn't come back with you? I mean, I guess he was making a movie, but it's like, you're going to send your 8.5 month pregnant wife on a boat across the sea without you to just go home and wait. And I mean, if he would have been there with her, he would have been murdered too. But it's also kind of weird that he wasn't there, because it's like, who lets their wife who's 8.5 months pregnant just go on a boat by herself? It's kind of weird. And that she has to be a good girl. Yeah, I agree. Like that whole thing with the Jupiter rising of, I need to be a good girl. I shouldn't complain. I shouldn't say anything, that type of energy. And, so the other thing that, I'm going to mention, so Roman Polanski definitely having a major dark side, a very dark sexual side, as I mentioned, Sun opposite Pluto. People saying she was extremely intimidated by him and that he had control over her at times. And, when she became pregnant, he, was trying to coerce her into having an abortion. And then when she didn't, he went and had an affair with Michelle Phillips from the Mamas and the Papas. So he's like, you're not going to do what I say. I'm going to go have an affair with this other lady. So that's also written in the book too, about her life and their relationship. So you can see that kind of controlling energy. Oh, you're not going to do what I say. Because he didn't want to have a kid, and you can see that he's represented by Saturn in an opposition to her fifth house of children. So he didn't want to have a kid. Now, eventually he changed his mind, Uranus, and he was okay having the kid. But, he didn't want to have a child, and he wanted to have a cool hippie nomadic lifestyle. You can't really do that when you have kids. And so, he's like, have an abortion. She's like, I don't want to, and I'm not going to. And he's like, fine, I'm going to go hook up with this other lady then. It's like, okay. So again, controlling energy. And if I hold up my end and be good, you'll keep me safe. But he didn't. No, I agree, DG. I agree. I completely agree. And in interviews, he says that Sharon's murder haunts him to this day and that he never has gotten over it. Now, I don't know how good of a guy he is, really, because he's assaulting 13-year-old girls like 5 years later. So it's like, okay. But at the same time, you have to wonder, why is this guy letting his pregnant wife, leave him? Like, why can't she just stay in London with him and have the baby there? Why is she doing that anyway? And why isn't he with her? And why isn't she there? Like, why is she having to come back anyway? I mean, word is that she wanted to come back to the US, probably because her mom was there and her family was there. But, there was also a rumor that he was there to like have an affair at the same time too. So it's like, okay, what's going on? And the interesting thing about the nasty rumors, I will say, with this Mercury opposite Pluto, Mercury being the planet of communication, Pluto, being about these rumors that are really nasty coming out. Like, people thought, he had something to do with the murder when she was murdered, like he had something to do with it. And he maintained, obviously he didn't, and they caught the people who did the murder, but, he complains that there's all these like, rumors that he was cheating on her when she was getting murdered, all this stuff. And he's crying on TV, like, no, that's not really it. And it's like, okay, well, what is the truth? And so we can definitely see nasty rumors with Mercury Pluto, but I also think he could be very intimidating intellectually. And if you listen to him in interviews, he is very sure of his opinions. He is very opinionated and sure of his opinions. And he has, a different viewpoint because he is from another culture than Sharon. Sharon grew up in the United States. He's from Europe. He grew up in a completely different culture. So he has very specific ideas about the world and how things work. And she probably felt, inferior to that in a way. So I think that is interesting too. And so what else about Roman Polanski? And, here's the thing. Roman Polanski had the professional and personal power that Sharon Tate, I think, wanted for herself, and sometimes we do that. Like, I feel she really wanted to become confident and feel powerful within herself. And, because she wasn't feeling that way, she's kind of seeking a partner out who has like a lot of charisma or is very powerful or, has a lot of professional and personal power, because she wasn't there yet. And who would have known over time what would have happened? Maybe she would have gained that power, and Pluto isn't there just to like punish us and beat us with a stick, but Pluto is there to show us our unconscious material and to show us, why we're doing certain things and why we're reaching for that thing. And it wants us to change. It wants us to integrate what we're wanting and change. And Pluto is there as a guide to help us change. Now, that change got cut short because she was, murdered. But at the same time, I do feel like, that Pluto is looking across to the seventh house of partner saying like, I need this. Like, I need you to show me my personal power, Sun Pluto. And oftentimes it is through difficult lessons that these things happen. But, what she was kind of reaching for as her own charisma and personal power, and then kind of finding that in a partner. Yeah, there is a lot of karmic energy with him. There really is. And I did look at his chart briefly and I was like, ooh, like there is. And Roman Polanski was actually, he's a Jew, and he was in like the Jewish camps back in the day, during World War II. Like, he was a Polish Jew who was stuck in one of those camps. And I don't know if his family was in the Holocaust. He was a child when it was happening. So, he's obviously had a very, and then his wife is like, brutally murdered. His unborn child is brutally murdered. He's a fugitive running away from the US because he's getting charged with, attacking children. Like, it's a lot of energy. It's a lot of karmic energy there. And, everybody has karmic energy, but you can really feel like Sharon probably having a lot less karmic energy than he does. I mean, she still has things to integrate, but, not at the level that he does. I feel he's really, out there. Oh, Sally F. Hey, what are you up to? I'm up to this, my friend. I'm up to this. And let's go ahead and see what else we want to talk about. And, Roman Polanski does have a pretty large ego, I think, too. Like, he's very certain of himself. We have that Sun Pluto going on. I don't know if I want to say much more about the Sun Pluto, but it's definitely there. And, the power dynamic between them is also there. One more thing I want to mention about Pluto, because Pluto, oftentimes people think the Pluto person is the one like showing all the power and is the one aggressing, or the one who's, like the underdog villain, like fighting back, but it's not always that way with Pluto. Like, sometimes Pluto can represent compulsive cooperation. Like, I'm just going to compulsively cooperate because, I'm still working on feeling and understanding my own personal power, so there's the other end of Pluto where we can be, Pluto also has to do with an energy of, feeling undermining. Now, I just want to explain the definition of when you undermined someone, okay? And when we think of mining or going deep into something, that's very Plutonian. But when we're undermining someone, the definition of that is to make someone feel less powerful and less confident, and to make them feel weaker, okay? And you can see that with Pluto rising too, where it takes maybe a long time to find one's personal sense of agency and power, and where there may be forces around you, or even the things that you do to your own self to undermine your own power. But there is that energy there with Pluto. And it's not always about being the aggressive Plutonic person. Sometimes it is about being in the opposite position of that. And learning from that, and I saw an interesting statement about Pluto, and I never actually heard this before. And I think it's actually true. It says, Pluto can also represent excessive brightness and perkiness as a compensation for unfaced inner darkness. Okay. So we're excessively like bright and perky as a way to kind of cover up our own inner darkness. And, you could see where maybe that is something that has happened with Sharon in her life, like, am I valuable? Am I good? Do I inherently have value without having to prove myself to all these people? Do I have beauty beyond my looks? Like, all these questions that we have, and then, Pluto submerging that. But Pluto also there is a guide to help us reveal what we need to learn about ourselves so that we can progress karmically, so Pluto isn't, I remember an astrologer I heard talking about Pluto one time, and he had mentioned that when his father died, he was having his son Pluto conjunction at the time his father died. And it's like, okay, the sun represents father. Pluto is, death and rebirth. Of course, father died. And, you could live your life completely afraid of that transit. Well, I don't want my father to die. And then, son Pluto comes along and you're like, oh my God, like my father's dying, right? But his whole comment about that was Pluto is really there to help us through those periods of loss and grief and to help us, be rebirthed and reborn from that. And Pluto there as a guide to help us through that, not to like push us down and hurt us, and so that I love that perspective of Pluto. And it is a different way of looking at things. And the Pluto mask, yeah, for sure. And the Pluto mask is very interesting. One time I was at an astrology conference and there was this guy standing across the room from me. And then there was another person there and he was talking about doing a podcast at the conference. And, we were all like in a triangle, kind of like facing each other. And he's like, everyone got on the topic of Pluto. And, a guy was like, oh yeah, I want to do an episode on my podcast here about, Pluto and the ascendant or Pluto rising. And I knew the guy across from me was a complete stranger, but he also had Pluto rising. And we just looked at each other. And I mean, I felt the hair on the back of my neck, like rise up. And I'm like, what is the energy, And it was like, I see you, brother. It was kind of interesting. It's like two Pluto rising people encountering each other, like, okay. But you can feel something with that. And that Plutonic feeling that comes up and the way we talk about that and the way we experience that. But anyway, just a side note story. I remember what I was thinking at that time, and it was something very brilliant about Pluto. But then I turned my head and it went away. And I was like, I'll never get that thought back. So it's just so funny. But anyway, I was like, no, I think I got it. I think I got the essence of Pluto. And then it just like disappeared from my head. But yeah, so, the Pluto rising in her chart is a big deal. It is because she's needing to bring some unconscious material, especially about power, personal power, ego, etc., trying to understand that energy, oftentimes through the energy of a partner, and these are the lessons that we're here to master while we're here. So, things come up. But anyway, so I think I want to go ahead and start looking at the transits from the day that she passed. So I mentioned before I was going to spend most of this reading talking about her life and who she was rather than the murder and the gruesomeness of it. But I am going to show you guys the transits on the night that the murder happened. And I am going to show you her chart compared to Charles Manson's cult member named Tex Watson, who is the one that stabbed her, 16 times. I don't even know it's just hard. I don't know how, I'm not going to go into it, but I will show you her chart compared to his chart because there's actually reliable birth data there's reliable birth data for Charles Manson, for the members of the Manson cult who were there that night to, kill the residents at her house where Sharon lived. Like there is reliable birth data for all those people. And I actually looked at them all, but I'm going to pick out the one who actually, did the deed and was responsible for, hurting her. So we're going to look at the charts and I'm not going to spend forever on it because I know time is a ticking, but I do want us to take a look at the night of her murder. So this is the transits. And again, if you're having transits that are the same in this chart, don't panic, don't freak out. It doesn't, anyway, I just want everybody to be cognizant that they're, taking care of themselves and not getting freaked out by astrology, because that's the last thing I want to do for anybody. But let me go ahead. I got to find my page here where I have the information. Okay. So one thing that, the murder was, they said, a little bit after midnight on August 9th, 1969. So the ascendant for whenever that event happened, if it's a little after midnight, that ascendant is going to fall. This is the ascendant from the night of the murder right here. That is going to fall in her 11th house of friends, no matter what time, if it's a little bit after midnight. And that ascendant is also in a conjunction with the ruler of her 8th house, okay, of decay and death and transformation. And so, as I mentioned before, on the night of her death, the Charles Manson family cult members came into her house. Everybody was sleeping. It started like brutalizing everybody, and her friends were there. There was several friends in the house with her at the time. And, so we see this chart, and we see the rising for the night of the murder, around the time of it was in the 11th house of friends. And we also see that ascendant in a conjunction with the ruler of her 8th house, which is Saturn. And, surprising and shocking events that happened there as a result. Now, some people have said that it's unfortunate that most people know about Sharon Tate because of how she was murdered, instead of like her work as an artist or as an actress, which I also think is interesting because the midheaven of the night of the attack is in a conjunction with her sun opposite Pluto, which just tells me, like, to me, that's also a sign that, she was, because the midheaven is how we're well known and how we're seen. So that event like really changed how she was seen, obviously, and people knew her really well because of that murder, unfortunately, much to her family's dismay, because they're like, I don't want everyone to know her because of how she died. We want her to know who she is because she's a beautiful person. So we have that going on. Now, we can see, like I said, the ascendant on the night of the murder is close to the ruler of the 8th house, which is the house of death and decay. Some of the other transits happening. So what's interesting in the 12th house is where our mothers are basically pushing when they're giving labor. So, the 12th house represents the time when our mother's in labor, the hard part. And then the ascendant is when we take our first breath. And so I just think it's really sad that, the moon and Venus are both in Cancer, like sign of being a mommy, sign of having, Cancer babies, being a mommy in her 12th house, like the child was never born. And, that her child that she was 8.5 months pregnant with, that moon Venus is in a square to her Neptune. And it's like a dream that dissolved, or, she wanted to be a mom more than anything. I just think that that's really sad. And I hope her baby didn't suffer in that, because that is just, when I was reading about it, I was like crying. I was like, oh my gosh, but it's just sad. She wanted that so badly. And then, those planets are squaring her natal Neptune, just saying like the dream is over, the dream died, we can also see the transiting. Now so when I was looking at this death chart, I was really looking for activations to, Uranus and Mars, and also Pluto, because those are some of the planets, and any activations of the 8th house, because those are really areas where if we're looking at, violence or things happening, those are some of the things that we would look for, like Mars, Pluto, Mars, Uranus, the 8th house being activated. And we can see right away that transiting Mars on that day of her murder, Mars at 8 degrees Sagittarius is in an opposition to her natal Uranus. So there we have a Mars Uranus opposition. And I didn't even mention to you guys in her chart that this Mars is in a quincunx with her natal Uranus. And you may be saying, like, what in her chart shows that perhaps violence could be there. And so I made a little list of things in her chart. And one of those things would be this Mars quincunx Uranus. She also has Mars square Neptune. Like, those are some things. By declination, she also has Mars Pluto. Now, if you have those things, please don't think that this is going to happen to you, but I've just mentioned it. Okay. So I was looking for activations to this Mars or this Uranus or Pluto or the 8th house. And, transiting Mars is in an opposition to Uranus. Okay. And that transiting Mars is in the house of the 5th house of children, opposing her Uranus in the 11th house of friends. And of course, friends died. Of course, her unborn child died. Very shocking event. That was like horrible, and so we can see that energy there. We can also see the current north and south node, transiting north and south node in Virgo and Pisces. We can see that squaring her natal Mars, that Mars at 28 degrees Sagittarius. So the nodes, transiting nodes, squaring her Mars. So again, the Mars representing the 5th house of children. So some very fated events going down, violence against her children, very sad. We also see transiting Pluto in Virgo at 23 degrees, squaring her natal Mars. And again, that's a very long transit, and that had been going on for a while. But definitely Pluto squaring her natal Mars. And again, Mars ruling the 5th house of children. So very sad. And then we also have that transiting Pluto in a quincunx with Venus. Okay. So again, the 8th house Venus there. The other thing I already mentioned, transiting Mars, opposite Uranus, opposite Saturn. Okay, this transiting Mars opposite the ruler of her 8th house of death and decay. All right. And then we also have this transiting Mars square her moon. So this transiting Mars is really going off and touching, multiple points in her chart. Transiting Pluto is also touching major points in this chart as well. And so those are some transits that were happening on the night of her murder. It certainly would have been a time to be very careful, and especially as it relates to children and accidents and sudden things happen. I mean, you would almost say with that sun opposite Mars, or that Mars opposite her natal Uranus, perhaps like going into labor or going into like a surprise, woo, I'm in labor, could definitely, trigger that energy. But it's just, the way things happened that night were not that. So it's very sad. Now, I know that's kind of quick, you guys, we're running on time, but I just wanted to show you some of the transits that were happening that night, that fateful night. And I want to particularly show you guys the chart of the person that murdered her and show you what's going on in their charts. I also, Charles Manson wasn't at that house when she was murdered, but he ordered the murder. And so I wanted to look at his chart with her chart as well. And what's interesting, Charles Manson, his moon opposite Pluto is right on her sun opposite Pluto, and his nodes are hitting her sun opposite Pluto. So very fated energy, even between her and him as well. But I did want to take a look at the chart of Tex Watson. Now, what's interesting is Sharon Tate was born in Dallas, Texas. And the guy who murdered her from the Charles Manson cult, he was also born in Dallas, Texas. Now, he was a couple years younger than her, but, so Sharon's chart is on the inside here. And then Tex Watson was the one who had, stabbed her multiple times. His chart is on the outside here. And, right away you can see that he is a Leo rising and his ascendant is on her Pluto. Okay. You can also see that Tex Watson has a Mars Pluto conjunction in his first house that is hitting her Pluto. Now, Mars Pluto, especially, for this guy, Leo rising, Mars Pluto conjunction, very violent. This is a very, very violent guy. Now, I'm not saying all people who have Mars Pluto are violent people, but this particular guy, you can see Saturn in Cancer retrograde in his chart, thinks the world owes him something, mad at the world, hates everyone, wants to destroy everything. His Mars Pluto conjunction in Leo is in an exact conjunction with her Pluto, and his ascendant is on her Pluto. So we can also see his Mars is opposite her sun in Aquarius. And his Pluto is opposite her sun in Aquarius as well. So his Leo planets are hitting her first house. And of course, our first house is our body, our physicality, the safety of our body and our physicality. So he's showing up as a Mars-Pluto conjunction in her first house with Pluto. So I just thought that was, when I saw that, I was like, whoa, because, he is the one that, did those fatal blows. And look at his Venus, moon, and his sun, Mercury, all these planets in her fifth house, right? The fifth house being the house of children. All of these planets now, what he did to her is a huge, I hope that guy burns in hell, honestly, for doing that to her. I have no kind words for him. It's an extremely karmic event. Look at that Mars. Mars in Sagittarius rules her fifth house of children. His south node is on that Mars. He killed her child. Not only did he kill her, he killed her child. And the karmic, the karmic repercussions of that are crazy, just crazy. And what's crazy, you guys? I feel like, now this is just me riffing, and you don't have to take this to the bank or anything. But I honestly feel like, he might have hurt her child in a past life too. We see his past life in a conjunction with her Mars in Sagittarius, which represents her child. So that just makes me think he could have even done something awful to her child in a past life. There's just some energy there, and there's some, things going on, because his node is hitting that Mars, which represents her child. And there's a lot of stuff happening. And as I mentioned, Charles Manson's chart also really hits her points in her chart really hard too, hits her sun Pluto opposition really hard. With his moon, Pluto hits it exactly right there with his nodes. So it's very, very sad, because he really, his own self-destructive energy and his own craziness taking away her opportunity to be a mother and to be a mother in this lifetime. Very sad. And I don't want to end on a super sad note. Let's look at a pretty picture of her. And DG says, yep, my Pluto's in the 7th. The only reason I've survived with my life from my ex was probably something to do with Chiron in the 1st. I don't know. Yep. Very, very serious energy. And we have to go what protected us in those moments, and why weren't other people protected? It's not fair, I get it. And, the hard part about astrology is that it doesn't have all the answers, and it doesn't tell us why, some of us lived and, some of us didn't, it doesn't tell us why all the time these things happen. But yeah, devastating. Indeed, my friend. And let's go ahead and, it's interesting with Pluto rising people. I've shared with you guys, I'm also Pluto rising, and, I had a near-death experience as a child that was really awful. And, Pluto does signify death and rebirth. And it is, I'm not saying it can't be scary. It can definitely be scary, but, we also have to keep in mind too, like the positive aspect of Pluto, so that we're not like running around with our hair on fire all the time. We have to keep in mind, like, Pluto is here to help us unearth the things that we're meant to see and know too, not saying there's any reason for violence or things like that, or child abuse, or definitely not trying to excuse anything like that. But I think also too, when we get older and start integrating some of our lessons, as you guys all know, like the Pluto stuff becomes more clear. The problem for Sharon Tate is that she didn't get to be old enough to kind of understand that. She was only 26 years old when she passed. So it's like, why, and it's just hard, sometimes when we see these things happening. And there she is right there, looking beautiful, looking amazing, and stunning human being, not just on the outside, but on the inside too. And so I think I'm going to go ahead and leave it there, you guys. I hope you enjoyed this reading, and I hope you found it, I don't know, maybe a little bit educational or something. And I know it's a heavy topic. I tend to always do the heavy topics. Why? But anyway, maybe next time we'll do a little bit lighter of a chart. But I mean, her chart was light. It was light, actually. It's the things that happen around us, right? I do feel her chart was actually really full of light. So let's remember it that way. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you, thank you, thank you, and take care.